So we're now broadcasting from the Impactful Innovators studio. Welcome John Crossin. John is an impactful innovator that has a specific connection to the Severino Center, and I'm really excited to hear his background. He's gone through a whole bunch of different startups. You'll hear one on his own and then many helping other people. But along that path, he crossed paths with Paul Severino at Bay Networks and worked with that larger company, and really has just had a very impactful and exciting career. And so welcome, John. Thanks for taking the time to chat with us today.
Great. I'm John Crossin, and I'm going to talk about what I did and how I got there and different ways to do it. I'm sure that you've been through a couple of these so far in the last couple of weeks, and a lot of the speakers are CEOs, CTOs, guys who have started companies and things. And I'm going to talk about something else. I've been part of possibly upwards of 20 companies, different levels of startups and things, some for a short period of time, some as a consultant, some as a principal, but I only ever had one idea in my life to do these things. So I'm like 1 in 19, but the 19 generally are successful companies because I did things for them that they just needed done. So if you're interested in doing something entrepreneurial, what I'm trying to say is you don't need to be the idea guy. You can have other people who can be the idea guy and you just make it work. One of the best people I ever worked was a guy who was one of the great CTOs of all time. He was just great. This guy kept coming up with great ideas. He couldn't get anything done literally to save his life. But he and I hooked up a bunch of times, and he'd come up with an idea and I'd make it work. So what this whole point is that there's a lot of ways to do it. So when I start to go through these slides, what my plan is to do is talk a little bit about me, and then I'm going to give you some things to think about as we go through this, about what matters and what is success. And then we'll get to the end about what I learned and what didn't work. And then I've got some slides about some companies. And I'm going to talk about what the company was about, but I'm not going to go into the technology of the company. I'll talk about why it was relevant at the time. But some of these are very old, even from the 80s. But at the time, the technology was new and interesting and innovative. I was telling somebody yesterday that we did a supercomputer in the 80s, and your phone is now 40 times more powerful than this thing was. And we were selling them for $1 million. So I don't want to get bogged down in what the technology is. So what I did, as you can see, from when the Stone Age existed, I was at RPI. But don't laugh, it's true. I was part of the 5-year program. I did a bachelor's degree and a master's degree, basically concurrently. At the time, graduate degrees weren't really common at that time. But I'm really pretty much of a fan of learning what you can learn and then figure out what to do with it. So I ended up with a master's degree in 5 years. Shortly thereafter, I got a job and I worked for some companies, which we'll go through shortly. And then I decided that just being an engineer wasn't satisfying enough for me. So I wanted to learn how to be sort of a business guy. And this was obviously in the 70s, and MBAs were not really prevalent at the time. And also they have a lot of accounting and stuff to it. So I was in Eastern Massachusetts. So I found a program at WPI, which is basically a technical MBA. And I worked my way through it and I got it. And I learned a whole bunch of theoretical how to run a company. And then the last thing to do is I am a registered engineer. So I'm quintessential geek. So I go through the companies that I work for. I want everybody to think about why they want to do something that's not a big company. There's a bunch of reasons, and even on this list is if you want to become famous. If you start your company, you can become famous, and if that's important to you, then you need to consider doing it. Otherwise, you can work for a big company. I had two roommates, one who went to work for IBM and one who went to work for Digital, and both of them lasted in their companies for over 45 years. They were absolutely thrilled what they did. They were wizards. They were extremely well known throughout the company and throughout the world for what they did. And they never wanted to go out on their own. And they were as happy with their career as I was with mine. So what the point is, you have to understand why you want to do what you're going to do, and are you going to do it? The thing Clint and I talked about before is if you're going to go do something, you need to understand what are you going to do with it. And that's what the bottom two pieces on this slide show is. You can come up with the world's greatest thing. My wife's got a cookbook, and in the front of it, it says, if you think putting lime juice on beef Wellington is a good idea, you ought to try it before you feed your friends. So just coming up with a really great idea doesn't really mean it's going to be useful or well received or profitable or whatever it is you think you're going to need to make it successful. So the last line on here is a concept that I came up with a long time ago, and it might take me a while to explain. When I started out, everybody worked for a big company. I started at Raytheon, then I went to Digital. We'll get to those in a minute. But those are large, vertically integrated companies. They did everything. They made pieces. They wrote software. They did marketing. They supported it. They did everything, completely soup to nuts. The market has changed. And now there's what's called at the bottom of this, it shows as features, products, and companies. A feature is something like an app you can get from the Apple Store or something. It's not a standalone product, but it helps somebody do something. The company that I'm working with right now, which is the RPI one, which is the last one I'll get to, it's called Virtual Phantoms. We have what I consider to be a feature. It is something that is now buried in almost every CT scanner on the planet. And people don't know that Virtual Phantoms is the creator of it. And we've got about 24 companies and partners out selling it. So that's a feature. It's not really a company. It's just a feature. We're doing extremely well, but there's no pretense of having lots of bag carrying salesmen or any of that stuff. That's a feature. The next level up is you actually have something to sell, a physical entity or something which is quantifiable object, which is known to be yours. And then the last version of this is a real full-blown company. So as I go through these things, you'll see some of them are each of these things, and it sort of matters what is successful and what you set out to do. The other parts that happen on the way through this are, especially if you do a little company, your life is different. When I went to work for the first startup that I went to, and I got interviewed technically of what was the company, how was it going to work, who was going to do what. And then the part that was actually a fabulous idea, which I did myself in most other companies, is before I could get accepted, they had to talk to my wife. Because the first line that he told him is, you won't see him for the next 2.5 years. He will be completely consumed by this job. It's nights, it's weekends. We work 29 days a month, and that was the deal. So if you they didn't care what I told Lori, my wife. They needed to tell her that this is a serious operation. She went for it. We ended up hiring 36 people, and we built a supercomputer with 36 people. We lost nobody. It worked out great. I made friendships with these guys. It was truly a family kind of thing. And then the last thing to think about as you're going through is, why did you do it? What do you want to do? And what is success for you? And how do you get out? Or why do you leave? Because you can't be afraid to leave. Okay, so now I'm going to buzz through some companies. The first company I went to was at Raytheon. And some of the questions I got yesterday is, how did you start and where did you go? Remember, I was a graduate school RPI graduate, and Raytheon hired me because they thought that I could solve interestingly hard technical problems. So I got there, I was an engineering analyst, and they would just give me, thermal problems or structural problems or something, and I would solve them, and it was great. And as the bottom line here shows, school and companies are different. They tell you to do things and you have to get it done on time. And there's no such thing as end of the semester. If you're going to fire something into space, you have to make sure it's not going to overheat, and you got to be really sure you got it right. And I finally decided that that's not a job for me. That's just they slide papers underneath your door. You do things, you slide the paper back out, and you wait for the next one. Didn't like it. Didn't want to do that. So I went to Digital Equipment Corporation, which at the time was the mini computer king of the world or something. And this company eventually had 100,000 people who worked for it. It was completely vertically integrated. That they made circuit boards, they made integrated circuits, they did power systems, they had marketing, they had distribution, they had service. It was a huge company, and it was fabulous. One of the best jobs I ever had. But I went there as a packaging engineer, which means I was a physical designer. So I was working on what the product was and designed it. It transitioned through life, more and more responsible. And this is where I got the idea that I should go to school and learn how to be some managerial things. And I did that. And I was there for about 7 years, got promoted like 5 times, worked on some absolutely fabulous products, absolutely tremendous time, but the company got too big. So one day I got a call from this company, the supercomputer company I talked about, and they go, "We need you to come help us do this." And I go, "Well, what's my job?" And they go, "Anything you want it to be." So I went there. I was the first physical designer they hired. And then as the company started to grow and we started to get designs, we had to buy things and build things and certify them and support them and do all the kind of things that real companies did. And we did absolutely fabulously well. But the attributes that worked to do this, as I said, is everybody had the shared goal. We knew what we were doing. People would put in the time. Even my wife would come in on weekends and help us build things. And everybody, other people's wives would do it. I would do part of this company again for free. It was such a fabulous thing. I learned more about every bit of the company than you could possibly imagine. And it served me in great stead. Then we got this crazy idea. We should go public because that's what everybody did. It completely changed what the company did because now we had an external focus. You had to do things by, report on quarterly, and it was more about finances. And it just, the company literally fell apart because we weren't doing what we were doing before. And so that's what I was getting to before is you have to know when to get in and when to get out. And I just decided I needed to leave because I just couldn't do things like that. I needed to go work at my own pace, doing things, not do something that Wall Street told me I needed to do. So we went out and Mr. Severino decided that he had a company and he needed help. So I went there. Inc. magazine every year ranks companies about how well they did and how fast they grow. Wellfleet was the fastest growing company in America twice. I mean, this company, we just could do no wrong. It was amazing. The problem was we were just growing like crazy. And then one day we were sitting around, and what Seb would do is every year he'd put a bunch of people in a room and go, "What are we going to do for next year?" Which was great. Involve everybody in the process about what do you think we should be doing? Where do you think we should be going? How do we get there? And right at the end of this 2-day thing we were doing, one of the management consultants we had came and goes, "What would you guys do if Cisco decided they didn't hate Cabletron anymore?" Cisco was the largest router manufacturer, and Cabletron was the largest hub manufacturer. They both controlled their spaces. If they did that, they would just kill us. So what Sev decided to do is he knew Andy Ludwig, who was the president of Synoptics. He flew out there and they created Bay Networks over the weekend. And we integrated the company. We bought, I think we had like 14 companies at some point. And we just made a huge company out of it. But it got too big. I was commuting bi-coastally. It was no longer the fit for me. And I worked for this guy, Mike Grady. Mike Grady decided that he had an idea for a company. And we talked to Sev, and he said it was just fine that we could leave. So 4 of us took off, and we made this company called Argon Networks. And we were doing something that Wellfleet didn't want to do. And when we did this, as the slide shows, the 4 core of us in the beginning all worked at Wellfleet. We all had this great relationship with each other. Absolutely fabulous company, worked really well. The problem was somebody decided that they wanted to buy it. It was Siemens, and they bought it, and then they turned it into a German company, and they killed it. Again, what this means is that you have to know when to get in and when to get out. So we all just left. But again, for all the right reasons, I developed the product, we got the product out, had a great time, made a ton of money. It was fabulous, but it was time to leave. Then I ended up at a place that was during the internet bubble. We just got too much money. Everybody was too successful. And it, again, grew way too fast, got out of control, and people just didn't know what they were doing. Product was great, but I no longer fit. And a lot of these were a year or two. The whole idea is do it for why you want to be doing it, learn what you can learn, and move on. One of the venture guys called me and said, I need you to come in and look at this company for me and figure out what to do. This company called Revivio. They invented something called continuous data protection. This is when processors and memory started to get very inexpensive. So we could figure out how to keep your data safe. We decided we didn't need a CEO. So they made me do it because I was the old guy. Got the product done. It was great. When it was time to go get the second round of funding, I had it all set up. But part of the deal was we needed a real CEO, a real suit kind of guy to come in and just really run the company. They hired this guy. He came in. He completely changed the culture of the company. He did it in a completely different way. And not surprisingly, 6 weeks after we hired him, he decided he didn't need me. And I was released. I go, maybe I don't want to be working for big companies anymore. So what I started to do is, obviously I've met a lot of people along the way. And this guy called and he had an idea for a product. This is when the internet, when wireless was starting to become very common. He had an idea for a product for a vending machine. When people stock vending machines, they drive their truck over, they put the product in, they take the money out. And if they haven't sold anything, they waste time. And if this machine's been empty for a while, they wasted time. So this guy came up with a way how we could figure out what product was sold and have the guy show up at the right machine at the right time. So we made some devices, we made some software, and this was the first virtual company I ever did. There were only 5 of us involved, and the 5 of us were never together, ever. We did this completely virtually. This was the early 90s. And that changed my life because now I knew that you didn't have to go, someplace every day and do it. We did 2 of these products. We did one for reading water meters, and we did another one for the vending machine thing. You can just invent things. You can have a ball figuring out what you want to be doing, do it, and then let somebody else do the parts you don't want. Grow the business, the sales, the marketing, all that kind of really hard stuff. That became sort of the mantra of what I started to do. This is the one that I came up with. Companies were buying platforms and putting software on it, and they needed to verify that it worked. So one of my friends and I came up with these 2 products to verify that they work. We blew through this product quickly. We made both of them, and we sold the company to somebody else. So again, we did the parts we wanted to do, and then we let somebody else who's better at something else just take the company over. The reason I want to talk about this one is I have a friend whose son wanted to go into business. He had a product, he didn't know what to do with it, but he wouldn't take any money from anybody else, wouldn't grow the business. He didn't get it to go. He never got around to doing what he was going to do. And he eventually had to sell what he did have to somebody else. The takeaway from this one is, don't be afraid to sell part of your company or all of it or whatever it's going to take to be successful. Some people go, well, I don't want to lose control of my company. Sometimes you really do. If you're not good at it, let somebody else take care of it. So this is one. You can declare this a success, but the two principles never made it happen. This one I got involved in. It was the software for helicopter services about when you get picked up by a helicopter, how do you transmit data to the ED so that they're ready when you get there? These guys, this was a BU Harvard company. They had a great idea. They never figured out what to do with it. And they brought me in. I got the product done. We did it for Boston Medflight, who's the air transport guy in Greater Boston. Then eventually I even transmitted it. It's not now in the International Space Station, same kind of thing, medicine at a distance. The problem with this one is the two founders literally were screaming at each other at the end. One of them wanted to sell it and the other one didn't. And it collapsed. So back to my point from early on, understand who your team is, what the shared goals are, and make it happen, which gets me to Virtual Phantoms, an RPI company. There are three of us involved in this now. It's essentially a virtual company. We've got distributors all over the planet. It's very successful. The three of us talk every week. We spend time, on Thursday afternoons, syncing up. How did you waste your week? What did you do? Who did you sign up? Where did we sell things to? I've been involved with this for probably, I think it's 7 years. We never fight. We always know what we're going to do. It's a fabulous company because we still have the shared goals and everybody knows what they're doing and why they're doing it. So I buzzed through these pretty fast, but there's a reason for that. So what the takeaways I want everybody to think about is, if you're going to do a little company, why are you doing it? What is important to you? How do you know when you're done? Success is defined by yourself, not by somebody else. And do it for you, understand why you do it, take a risk. Calculate what the risk is and make it work for you. And that's what I did. So hope that was pretty fast.
All right. So first I'll give you a virtual applause here. I can start off with one that, I'm just really, let me see. I was just trying to get you to stop sharing.
I could do an entire semester on all of these things, so I wanted to buzz it real quick. But
yeah, I'll start off with a question of my own, and then I'll ask the students to jump in. But I hadn't heard of virtual phantoms before, and we've always heard about challenge with IP in universities. I'm curious how things worked in that case, and if you have any positive aspects of hopefully the IP relationship and how it was able to come together to create something of value that made it out in the world.
The principal of Virtual Phantoms, who actually just left, is Dr. Zhu, Dr. George Zhu. He had an idea about how to do something. And a bunch of the students were working on something, and it was all under the auspices of RPI and NIH and a bunch of other people. And when this thing started to turn into something, there is a group at RPI, which is the development group or something, the IP or something group. And he approached them and said, we want to do this. So now what happens is RPI first owns part of the company, which is a great move. And we also pay them royalties and licenses every year for the use of the IP that was developed there. And it's as straightforward as that. If there's value to it, the university benefits, and we get to use the things that were developed there. It's really straightforward. We're very accommodating about it.
That's great to hear. That's wonderful to hear those success stories. We'll open it to the audience here. What questions do you guys have for John?
I got some questions yesterday about graduate school, not graduate school. How do you get started? My advice is just decide what you think you want to do, rather than try to find somebody who will hire you. Find a place. When I started, it was difficult to do something like that. What you did is you went to work for a company, but now there's a lot of ways that you can work for not big companies. Even in the Capital District, there's a bunch of angel guys and things. You can approach them and go, I want to work for a little company. How can you fit me in or something? You don't have to do the step-by-step progression that I ended up having to do. If you're willing to get in there and take a shot at it and not be afraid to fail and try to be the go-to guy, you can do it. The great part is very early in your career, you don't have a lot of social risk. When I was at the company 10 Blade, we had a bunch of Harvard postdocs working on stuff for us. And one of them came in and goes, I want to work here for Sirius. And I go, why? And he goes, I just bought a couch and I don't want to move. It's the first time in his life he ever really had to make a commitment. He was 27 years old and he was just bouncing around. And he goes, I want to do this. So he approached us and we hired him instantaneously, but we never would have asked him to do it. The idea is try to control your own destiny. Don't be afraid to call somebody. If you hear about a company or you can get into these angel investors or something, if you really want to go do this thing, just go do it, because there's no downside risk to it. You don't have a gigantic mortgage or anything yet. So now is the time to do it. 15 years into a career, if you have 14 kids, it's a lot harder to do, but take a shot. I'm thrilled I did.
I have some questions that the students submitted earlier, so I'll pick one out of that list that I thought was interesting. You took this path where you were working with really fast-moving, high technical companies and startups, and then you decided you needed something else that the educational experience could offer you. What did you get from that experience of going back to WPI that you didn't get working in the technical fields or even in the startups that are usually an all hands on deck type experience?
One of the other questions that somebody asked is, I presume it's on LinkedIn, did I list myself as an engineer entrepreneur? And I never thought of it until I read this question yesterday. And the answer is yes. I'm an engineering kind of guy. I unabashedly am a geeky kind of engineer, solve the problem guy. But I need greater levels of fulfillment to do something. Remember, I started my life as an engineering analyst, which means you give me a problem and I give you the answer and then I wait for the next one. I'm not that patient, and I'm on the spectrum, I'll be honest, and I can get bored. So what I did when I was starting to become project managers and things, I go, I can do this more efficiently. There's learning on the job, and then there's the technical part of how does this work? Operations research stuff. How do you control processes and things? And that's what I learned from WPI, is how to quantify how to do things rather than just like make it up and figure it out. And I'm thrilled I did it.
We got a question from Amar.
You gave a couple of examples of like companies you had started where like it was just a very small team that you had worked with. You didn't have like an office or work in person. So like what are some lessons that you learned working in these kinds of environments, right, where you don't get to sort of physically interact with these people on like a day-to-day basis?
when I did it, most of the early ones we did. But now what happens, I'll call this responsibility and empowerment. When you have a very small team, everybody has to do what's needed to be done. If this were a company status meeting, and tomorrow I said, we need this done, will you do it? And you go, well, I really don't know how to do it. And I go, neither does anybody else. So you're going to do it. So you figure it out. I just empowered you to go solve the problem, but you need to be responsible for it as well. And when you put empowerment, responsibility, and trust together, that's how companies build. If you tell me that you'll take care of it, I fully believe that you will take care of it, because we don't have time to keep going around. If I have to measure your work product every day or every week or something, I'm not getting done what I need to get done. Just need to trust your team. The companies that I worked for that were the most successful were the ones where everybody worked together. When I was doing the Bay Networks thing, I was traveling the world, and I worked for this guy, Mike Grady. I was not in the same room with Mike for 9 months. We were traveling around. I'd spend a week in Massachusetts, or mostly the East Coast, and then I'd go to California for a week. He did it the other way. What we did is we transferred off. So one of us was always in one of the main places, and he could just completely trusted me because at this point we'd had a relationship for like 4 years. And when I told him I'd take care of it, I'd take care of it. And as I said, I wasn't in the same room with him for almost a year. When he started his next company, I was the first guy he called. I'm the go-to guy. And it's not that hard. Just say you're going to do something and make it happen.
Amish, jump in with your question.
How have you taken the experiences you've met with working with so many companies in your career and then form an identity that you can proudly look back at yourself today? How have you been able to almost be another person after going through so much?
That's one of the things that I tried to cover is success, especially professional success, is defined by yourself. But one of the reasons I left some of these companies, which were tremendously successful, even when I was leaving them, it didn't fit me anymore. And that's important to me. I know who I am and I know what I want to do, and I know what I don't want to be. In some of these companies, the one called Revivio, we hired a suit. This guy literally had no idea what the company did, but he was the guy who could go out and get customers and that kind of stuff. I'm not that guy. I don't pretend to be that guy. I'm the guy who figures out how to get it to go. And one of the things that a lot of people think about is they want to make this hugely successful company, and have billions of dollars of revenue and things. You don't need to do that. If you have a $5 million a year grossing company, you have to sell $100,000 worth of product a week. You start to do the math. This is hard. So one of the things you find is that almost any of you guys, you can run a $5 to $10 million company. I mean, by strength of will, you can figure it out. And honestly, don't let it scare you. You can do it. But if you want to run a $50 million company, you got to sell $1 million worth of stuff a week. This is not kidding around. And I honestly don't know how to do that. I'm not good at that. So that's one of the reasons why know what you do, know what you like to do, know what you want to do, and then don't do the other parts. Let somebody else do it. Some of the companies that I left, I still had major ownership levels into it. So let somebody else be successful for you and go do the parts you want to do. Don't be forced into doing something from somebody else, because even if you're making a lot of money or you're getting celebrity or whatever you thought you were getting out of this thing, if it's not you, don't do it. Honestly, don't do it, because you're doing it for you. You're not trying to make somebody else successful. You're trying to be successful and happy. And if somebody pays you a lot of money to do something you really hate, they better be paying you a real lot of money, because it's not worth it. It's really not worth it.
All right, Sierra.
Yeah, so my question was when you're considering working at a startup, besides having passion for the product or the type of work that they're doing, what other factors do you consider in that company, either ahead of time or when you're interviewing with them?
Ahead of time, what I did is I tried to figure out why the company I was at what wasn't a fit for me, both personally and technologically. Where is the technology going to go, and who's going to be there?
Let's give John another hand here. All right. Thank
You guys got something out of this. Point is, you're going to hear from a lot of guys on these Wednesdays about how they started their company and what they did. And I just want to give you a different perspective of you don't have to be the guy with the idea who starts it and makes it into something big. You can start in the middle. You can start on somebody else's idea. There's a lot of ways to go. It's what works for you. And that's the most important thing I can tell you is figure out how you want to spend your day and hang around with people you like.
That sounds pretty cool.
I had one more quick question. Having worked for so many different companies, have you ever been asked in an interview, why did you hop around from different companies so much and have to, per se, defend why you left one company to start working for a new one?
A long time ago, back when dinosaurs ruled the world, people would go to a company and they'd stay there for like 15 or 20 years and then they'd shift and then they'd go someplace else. So a guy who jumped around, you were thought of as being like strange and you couldn't hold a job. That has changed. Now people go, why did you stay there so long? It's very easy for me to explain, how I went from company to company because the technology changed or it was a different size fit for me. Honestly, it's never been difficult for me to explain.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thanks. Here we go.